I want to thank you all for joining. Luis, if you're with us, we'll count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Maybe you were live before that. Thanks for always being so conscious about getting us on the live feed. And again, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to acknowledge that we did not send an agenda this week in advance of the meeting. I apologize for that, but the agenda is something we had talked about previously, and we knew that this meeting was really going to be about having some conversation regarding our budget balancing plans and solutions. And as you probably know from following along, we've been through a process where we published our reduction plans and presentation back on February 5th. We had our first board meeting on February 10th. We had a town hall just after that. We had a special meeting last week. No, sorry, that's this week on the 17th. And we'll have a town hall again next week before we have our next board meeting on the 24th. So we've had a lot of meetings throughout the process, a lot of transparency, a lot of community input, a lot of staff input through the town halls. We heard some great feedback. We've heard a lot of input on public comment. And today I really wanted to just focus on this topic as a whole. I'm not going to go through the entire presentation with the task force because it's something that I'm sure most of you have had a chance to see and review, but I am going to share my screen and go through a couple elements of what we're talking about so that we have some common understanding. And then I'm going to open it up for some questions, some answers, some discussion, and any feedback and input that the task force wants to provide that I can then take forward to the remainder of the trustees who aren't a part of this. We're lucky to have 2 trustees with us this evening, Trustee Jones and Trustee Campbell. Thank you for joining us. And I want to stop real quick before I share the screen. I see Joyce's hand up. Joyce.
I'm not sure when I should bring this up. I was going to email you, but I forgot. On page 20 of your presentation, it talked about the prep time reduction and then in each, and then it has a column for what bargaining unit it would affect. And I believe that you have all in there. And I don't think it affects all bargaining units as it relates to prep time.
Okay. Now is always a great time to bring it up, and it kind of leads into the presentation. So why don't I go through that presentation and maybe we can stop and talk about that when we get there. How's that sound, Joyce?
Okay.
Okay, great. All right. Matt, you're the first face I see in my grid once I share the screen. Are you able to see that? Okay, thank you. So this is obviously not today's date, but this is in preparation for our meeting on Wednesday. And so when we start going through the presentation, I'm going to go through some of these slides a little bit quickly. Anybody at any point, because I'll be looking at one screen and not monitoring the other, feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. But on the first few slides, these are things that we have already talked about. They are previous reductions that were taken in Fremont Unified in prior years from both May of 2019, June of 2019, and then more recently, June of 2020. And there's some things highlighted there that were impacted by our ability to reopen campuses. And we've talked about this at length, so I'm not going to really go into why we need further reductions. That's something that our task force has been very in tune with as we've gone along. And our task force is very informed that we can't use our bond dollars for general fund operating expenses or to resolve a structural budget deficit. Additionally, I know our task force is informed regarding our parcel tax and Measure I dollars needing to stay in the areas where we've committed those promises to the voters. The one thing I will note is true for most districts that I've ever been a part of or seen is oftentimes when we do pass a parcel tax, let's say, as this one was passed in 2010, when we go year over year and see increase in prices, I don't know if it's the best descriptor, but the way I describe it is the purchasing power of that parcel tax decreases over time, and it's a pretty significant impact over time that I think is hard to quantify sometimes when we don't stop and think about it. And this ultimately is the kind of the conundrum that we've talked about in this task force, so I'm not going to beat it up again, but to remind everybody that we're in this place where the county office is asking us to produce a reduction list up to 17.6. But with the governor's budget proposal, even more news that we're going to get some federal support. We know that that number is most likely going to be significantly smaller than 17.6. So we have this dichotomy where we're looking at both realities at the same time and what we need to provide to the county office and the very likely potential that what we end up reducing or enacting or implementing is much smaller than the 17.6 total. And just to go over that governor's proposal, we do see a 3.84% COLA, which is applied to our local control funding formula, which is what we want to see, because that local control funding formula gives us the base funding for each student enrolled in the district, right? And so when we see that COLA applied to the LCFF, it gives us the most broad increase of revenue, and that's what we're looking for in every case. You'll see in the bullet point below that, here, the 1.5% COLA, which is applied to special education and a few other categorical programs. Of course, what we want to see is we want to see the 3.84% COLA applied to every program, because that really helps drive the revenue in accordance with the COLA, but it doesn't always happen. And remembering that what we see here is a statutory COLA, and then we get a funded COLA. And last year, with everything that happened, we had a statutory COLA of 2.3 and we didn't get anything. This year it's 1.5 and we get 3.84. You see, we're kind of getting that one-time combination of both of those numbers. We are getting more federal dollars. And what's highlighted here on the right-hand side is what California's estimates are projected to be. And the governor has not yet said how he's going to allocate those funds, but we do think that they will continue to flow down and help school districts across the state of California. As a reference point, our current reserve is 3%. Back in 18-19, which is the last year this data was collected by school services, unified school districts had an average of 17.26. Now, remembering it's an average, so a lot of districts will have a number lower than that. Some will have a number higher than that. And if you've been around school finances for a while, you understand that those reserve numbers can really be impacted sometimes by one-time funding. It doesn't always mean that a district has 17% of ongoing reserves in their bottom line, but it does give an indication that with Fremont being at 3%, we need to be taking some steps to address our overall fiscal health. And when we talk about the January proposal, I think we've talked about this. This is where we see in 21-22, before our second interim, we're projecting that if we hold to the governor's adopted budget or proposed budget next year, our reduction would only need to be 6.4 million to maintain a 3% reserve. And then in the year out, in addition to the 6.4 that we would have cut the previous year, we would need to cut another 6.3 million. And so those numbers look drastically better than the 17.6 and the 13 million that we were looking at earlier. And that's why we're very hopeful that the governor's proposed budget will hold all the way through. Key points are things that you've heard me discuss many times. The bottom line is you're not going to see things on our budget reduction process that really jump out as, oh, this is going to create a new and better program or impact for kids in the community of Fremont Unified. When a school district goes through budget reductions in their second or third round of that, most of the time the reductions are significant and they have associated consequences that are usually not yielding a better overall learning experience and district, and that's the challenge of continuing to make such budget reductions. We know this because we've been a part of these discussions. And the next few slides, I just want to clarify, as you've probably heard me say before, if you've seen this presentation, these are cost items. They're not definitive proposals in any regard, but these are a cost analysis. This one represents what the cost savings would be if we were to increase class size at the elementary school level. You'll see in the blue, if the number of students in the class is increased, when you go over to the column here where it says FTE, that's full-time equivalency. Basically, a 1 in that column is 1 staff person full-time. And you can see the FTE savings. And we generate the savings because we need less personnel to deliver the instruction. In the same context, if we were to change the class size ratio at the secondary level, you see a corresponding analysis for our secondary programs. In the next few slides, these are cost items that could be considered for reduction. And on the top is furlough days and step and column. And I want to highlight, as we've talked about, all those things would need to be negotiated. And then we have other things such as shifting some funding for our public information officer, an increase in meal price, facility rentals, our SRO program budget, transferring a college connection program to the LCAP, which means if we do that, the program would stay in existence. The funding would go to our LCAP, and that does create a relief for our general fund. Redesign of some transportation, freezing the general fund portion of our professional development, reducing our board budget by 50%, a custodial reduction. And I want to call out that the effects must be negotiated. That is written a little bit differently than our other things because the collective bargaining laws are a little bit different for some of the decisions made related to reducing positions. And that's for classified positions. Synergistics is an energy program that was presented to the board on the 17th. And that is projected to result in a savings, but it is not something that the board has moved forward with at this time. Books and supplies, $250,000 TOSAs, or teachers on special assignment. That's listed per FTE, and management stipends is also listed. And then vacant positions. And there's a couple things I just want to highlight that I'm sure many of you understand, but just so we're clear. When we look at things like assistive technology and speech and language positions and we collapse those vacancies, it doesn't mean that we no longer need those positions. For these two areas specifically, these positions are mostly contracted out because they're very hard to hire people in these positions. And when we contract out, we're making an expenditure for those contracted services. And if we're able to hire somebody within the district, then we can reduce those contracted services and pay our own employee, which is always our intention. We have other vacant positions that aren't currently being filled, and we would be looking at collapsing some of those as a cost. Again, more vacant positions and collapsing those as a cost. They range from grounds, mobile maintenance, supply clerk, driver and van driver, and some various teaching positions. And they're not all full FTE, so that's why it doesn't always match up with how we might think about positions. If in the vacancy part of our budget we have a partial FTE, that may only have partial funding. So I just want to call that out. And then Joyce, this is, I think, the slide that you were referring to, and thank you for calling out.
Yes.
For calling out that mistake on my part. The 25% reduction in elementary prep, that does have to be negotiated, and you are correct, Joyce. It would not impact our classified bargaining unit positions, as far as I can tell. And I just want to clarify what the elementary prep program is for anybody who may not know. That is when our elementary students are not with, let's say they're in 4th grade, they're not with their 4th grade teacher. They're going to maybe science or another subject specific class. And during that time, the fourth grade teacher is working on lesson planning, working on assessments, working on the myriad of other responsibilities that the classroom teacher has in order to deliver high quality instruction, engage with parents, communicate with families, all of the responsibilities that fall there. And that is a common practice within school districts, that all the districts that I've ever seen. The amount of prep time is something that does vary from one district to the other. And if we did make a reduction in that, the reason there's a savings is because the number of teachers needed to be with the students when a fourth grade teacher, for example, is having their preparation time, that overall number is less. So that's where we would see savings. The last two items there are discretionary budgets and delaying the opening of Bringhurst. And then on the revenue side, we have put a slide together related to property sale or property lease. And one of the questions that came forward, either in a town hall or in a budget in a board meeting, I can't remember because we've had a few meetings on this topic, was why didn't we list these in our later tiers? You'll see those slides. Why didn't we list these as part of the budget adjustment, right? So what if we did sell a property or lease a property? And the reason we can't count them in the calculation is because we just don't know yet when that revenue would come in. So even if we elected, we're going through the 7-Eleven process right now, and if a decision was made to try and lease a property, for example, even once we make that decision, we have to find somebody who wants to lease the property, negotiate a contract for the lease, and it would be a little bit of time before we could see those revenues start coming into the district. I also listed in the presentation some parcel tax amounts. We recently didn't have a parcel tax pass, and it's just important to look at what that may generate as revenue, and it connects to what the amount of the parcel tax would be. Obviously, you can see the greater the parcel tax, the greater the revenue generation. And the last one is a little bit complicated, but it is related to healthcare benefits, and it does need to be negotiated. And the reason it needs to be negotiated is because currently our employees, they purchase benefits through our school district, and that happens under their contract for employment. And in the contracts, it calls out that the JPA, Joint Powers Authority, is CalPERS. And so that's where we are able to offer the health plans to our employees. And we are exploring the potential of changing JPAs and trying to make sure that we can provide our employees a healthcare program that meets all of their needs and still maintains the level of benefits that they're interested in having. And if we did change JPAs, we do have over 1,200 retirees that are covered under CalPERS. And this doesn't mean that they would lose their retiree benefits, but if we used a different JPA, we would not be subject to a $2.2 million administrative fee for that program. And it does need to be negotiated. So I just want to call that out. And it is, the administrative fee is specific to our retirees, but because the benefit programs are part of the collective bargaining contracts for everybody, that's why that part does need to be negotiated. And so we've talked about 3 tiers and trying to find the right structure to navigate this conversation between giving the county something that's 17.6 million and knowing that we may need to enact something that's at a much smaller amount than that. And so in sorry, I don't want to jump over this, but there's a note here because we have to publish our agenda this afternoon and some of the work is still in progress. So what we're publicizing here is the note that as we approach the board meeting, the presentation will be updated to reflect the feedback that we've received. But in prior board meetings, we have outlined 3 tiers, and you can kind of read them. I won't read them all to you. You're probably tired of hearing my voice. But a couple clarifiers on this. Some people have asked, why is there 2 numbers for the school resource officer program? The reason is that if we had no fiscal commitment to the program, the savings would be $885 based on the projection of cost for next year. If there for example, a 50% contribution, that amount obviously would be reduced by 50%. Towards the bottom, you can see the Hopkins 0 period. There is, Raish, you're going to have to correct me because I've gone through this too many times, just enough times to confuse myself. 4 or 5 periods paid out of the general fund.
Yes, CJ, that's correct. 4 periods out of general fund.
Okay, thank you. And so it's listed as $21,000 per section. And that first tier gives us, to that slide in a minute, but you can see all the elements that are on that first tier. And the second tier includes an increase in class size above what was listed in the first tier, which was specific to TK and K, and secondary class size, and then furloughs. I want to just call out the reason that says budget cycle is because in this model, and it has not been negotiated yet, it would need to be negotiated, but it spreads out a 4-day total over 3 years. And so that allows it to be captured over the budget cycle. And in the third tier, you can see the remaining elements. And what you've seen if you've been watching our conversations at the board level is a lot of discussion about where the things that are on these 3 tiers should fall. Should certain things be in tier 1? Should certain things come off the list? And that's part of the comprehensive dialogue that's happening for our Board of Education. And as you all know, that comprehensive process happens in front of the public. And so we've had 2 meetings on that, and we'll have more discussion about it on the 24th. And when we look at those tiers, you can see the tier 1 is outlined is just over 9 million, with some one-time reductions as well. And tier 2 is just over 9 million, and tier 3 is just over 5 million. So when we put all those together, it's just over 20 million. And we have a one-time reduction of 2.8. And if I didn't reference it earlier, that 2.8 one-time reduction is 2 million from a designation that we have in our budget. And what we would do is let that designation fall to the bottom line, which kind of cushions our landing a little bit. It doesn't create an ongoing savings, but as long as it stays in our reserve, it can help cushion our landing a little bit. And the 800,000 is related to Bringhurst. So that gives a pretty quick summary of what we've presented. And obviously our board has had some very good discussions about things that they'd like to see pulled from the list, and some things that they think should be closer to the front of the list or closer to the back of the list. And I appreciate the dialogue that they've been engaged in trying to make the best decision they can for our students and our staff and our community. And so this is a time where we can really open it up for our task force to ask questions. I'll answer as many as I can, the best that I can, and we can lean on Mr. Battle and Mr. Abbasi for that as well, or to collaborate and discuss other ideas and other parts of this process and other things that you think are going to be important for me to consider, or for our trustees that are joining us today to consider.
I have a question. Was this presentation sent to us at some point? Because Joyce, you said you seem to have one, but I never.
I saw it from the board meeting. It's on the agenda from the board meeting 2 days ago.
Okay.
And so when I
Thank
was watching the board meeting, that popped out because CSEA does not have prep time. And I'm like, what? If my members think they have prep time and it's getting so.
And Sheila, the presentation was posted as part of a community newsletter that I sent out a couple weeks ago. And it's been on all of our board agendas as well. And I'm sorry, I don't have the participation slot up, so if somebody's raising their hand, I'm not seeing it yet.
I just was going to chime in. One, just because Joyce had pointed out that it should be accurate about what has to be bargained. Anything for management, I understand, does not have to be bargained. So a question that our members had was, are none of the furlough days, for example, being proposed for management? because you listed that as having as units, which management is not a bargaining unit, and also that it must be negotiated, which I don't understand is actually the case. So that was one question. And then secondly, just a follow-up I had about books and supplies. Trustee Jones had asked about the $250,000, specifically what is that eliminating, right? Like we increased this year our funds for books and supplies, just the unrestricted portion, so not talking about CARES, not talking about other things. The unrestricted portion for books and supplies went in the multi-year projection from about $5 million to $7.5 million. So I have one question is, now in the multi-year unrestricted, why do we expect that increase? And then secondly, what do we believe out of that for $250,000 we are cutting as part of the budget cut proposal?
Okay, so let me start with the furlough piece, and then I'll go to Marcus for the books and supplies piece. On the furlough piece, Victoria, that's a great point, and I apologize if for the purpose of the presentation, I may have oversimplified the nuance of that. It's not my intention to say that management would be left out of the furlough day process, but you are correct in that management doesn't have the same collective bargaining rights of our represented unions. And so, as you probably know, Victoria, but some other members of our call may not, management negotiations kind of happen under what is called a meet and confer process. And it's not the same kind of collective bargaining that happens for our unions. So it would not need to be technically negotiated in the same way that it would with FUTA, CSEA, or SEIU. But in the same sense, it's not my intention to say that management wouldn't also be in that same scope. So it's a disconnect between I'm envisioning and cost calculating furlough days for all employees. But you're correct, the actual negotiated agreement would only have to be with FUTA, CSEA, and SEIU from a technical standpoint. Marcus, in terms of the books and supplies, I think we talked about that a little bit on Wednesday night. If you can maybe go back to that discussion.
Yeah, and there's two parts that I believe Victoria asked about, and one was the, I think dealt with the increase in the budget. I think you said from 5 million to 7 million, and I'll let Rais respond to that. But in terms of the $250,000, as I was stating at the board meeting, similar to what we did last year when we were trying to make adjustments in that line item, we were able to negotiate with the textbook manufacturers on our payments, because right now we're set up on payment plans in terms of our textbook adoptions. So what we will do is have conversations with them to make that adjustment. I think we should be able to do that, because they were pretty amenable to doing that last year when we were able to make some adjustments. In terms of the overall books and supplies budget, I'll let Rais talk about that.
So Victoria, if you're looking at the first interim report and the line item for books and supplies, that was a reality as of October 31st. Now we are preparing second interim report, and we have shifted budgets from books and supplies to other areas. So you are going to see a much different picture when we present our second interim report. I believe it's on March 10th, and that would be more accurately reflective of our true picture at this point as compared to first interim report, when we had to park some of the money in books and supplies account, and then we had a plan to shift it to other accounts as plans were made and as we were looking at different options and analysis. So it's going to be a very different and very accurate picture when we present on March 10th. As a matter of fact, the unrestricted books and supplies budget is going to be reduced, and there's increase on the restricted side.
And Matt, I see your hand up.
Yeah, the synergistics program that you had mentioned, I heard about it the first time we had a budget review. So I'm just wondering if any of you had Googled this company. It's a subsidiary of Enron, and they have lawsuits all over the place. So in my 30 years, we've probably, we've flirted with this on multiple companies, and they talk about sharing the savings, but the problem always was the reality is that if we don't actually exercise board policies, like currently AC, there's a board policy in place that states that we should have our AC set at 78. Well, if the staff doesn't get backing from the district office, those policies just go to the wayside. I've reported that the pools aren't covered. We have over 2 million gallons worth of water between the 5 pools, and they're heated to 80 degrees. And most of them aren't covered at night. I mean, the savings in that would be like probably 20,000 every quarter. The savings in all of the portables and that the power doesn't get turned off, it would be amazing during the breaks. We actually sole source an energy management company, and there's limitations with it. So I mean, we could actually recapture all of the savings if we actually enforced some of the policies that are in place. So I hope that you all take a look at this company. There was a lawsuit in Antioch. There's also a federal lawsuit with them. And it's basically, I'm just telling you, I've seen it many times. They come in and they make all these promises, but it never comes to fruition. And there's also, if you Google it, you'll find where districts were so displeased that they were sued by the company for trying to back out a contract. So I'm just hoping you guys do your homework before the board votes on this.
Well, I think it's a great point, Matt, and I appreciate you, bringing it up. And we presented it for the board for information because, as you know, the board has to conduct their business in public. So the board can't engage in a conversation about an opportunity like Synergistics in isolation, right? So it was discussed at the board meeting. They had representatives from the company there that addressed some of the concerns. I did Google them. I've talked to a number of districts that were very happy with them, but it doesn't mean that there aren't districts that aren't happy with them. Ultimately, it's the idea of what can we be doing differently to create savings, right? And yes, the question is, can companies, whether it's Synergistics or another company, can companies come in and make a promise to save us money and turn it into reality? And the hard part is the balance between those, right? So if we say, if we have a company that comes in and says that they're going to do that, and I'm not advocating for Synergistic as the company itself, but we have contracts with food service not employees, but vendors sometimes, where they cover a certain amount of a loss, right? And in Synergistic's case, they commit to a certain price. The challenge ultimately that I see is if we count, for example, we project we're going to save X amount by implementing energy reduction strategies, right? And as you're saying, Matt, it's that's a lot. That's a lot for everybody internally to make the adjustment, and us for really reach those savings. And so I don't know that it's the perfect answer. I don't know that it's the right answer. I certainly hear your feedback that we have to look at what we can do differently internally. Sometimes an outside lens helps with that. Sometimes we could, explore what do we do internally to help change some of those behaviors or some of those outcomes. So I think it's certainly good advice, and it was presented to the board for information only, and we haven't moved forward with it from there yet. So I appreciate that feedback and input.
Thank you, CJ. Yeah, we've had the position internally as well, and you do recapture a lot of savings having somebody go in and look. But it looked like a 5-year contract, and that's cumbersome. And we had a guy that came in and he would literally walk through the campuses all night and put Coca-Cola machines, put the Coke machines on time clocks, turn things off, and he produced savings, but there was people that naysayers that basically went behind him, and they added up the cost of things that were shut off that ended up costing, having a cost associated with that, and the savings were minimal. So, yeah, my 2 cents, but thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Joyce, I see your hand up.
So my question is for Matt and for you, CJ. So after listening to Matt talk about what he was talking about, I did watch the board presentation on the company. My question is to Matt, do we have the in-house capability to address the things you just listed about pools and portables? And if we do, why aren't we exploring this internally first before giving a contract out, if we have the manpower in SEIU to do that? And so was that not explored in lieu of looking for a company to help us find these savings?
Well, I can answer that. So when first thing I did is after I read it, and there's also, you'll find articles about how they lavish people.
Listen, Matt, you said, when you say, I heard it on Wednesday, Enron, when you say Enron to me, that you don't have to even finish your sentence. So.
Right. So, yeah. So the position in the past was sort of a management. It was an FMSA position. And it had 2 iterations. Basically, the first one was the guy who wandered around and just turned things off. The second was somebody that oversaw the purchasing for, that was primarily overseeing the purchasing and handling the EMS. So, once again, when you look at what they're offering, it's very wide open. What they say, it's ambiguous. And when you read the lawsuits, you see that, yeah, the ambiguity is where a lot of districts lose.
So if the district came to the maintenance department and the grounds and operations department and tasked this department with looking for cost savings as it relates to energy and things like that, is that an existing capability for you guys already have?
I'll say this. I had a conversation with our lead man. And he came back and he said, he says, do you know the portables that you were having trouble with at Chadbourne? There's probably about 20 portables, and almost all of our portables are electric heat. So as you know, that's ridiculous. It's very expensive. And a lot of the thermostats were standalone, which means they're not on a program where they can be shut off remotely or turned on remotely. And I responded to the school 20 times, and what it turned out being was a teacher that we couldn't get to turn off their heat at night. So we actually had neighbors coming and turning off the units externally and trying to hide that they do it. They would actually go inside the unit and turn it off. And I'm just thinking, so let's say that this company came in and they took a look at it. All the eyes on them won't do nothing if somebody doesn't back up a policy of this needs to be turned off on a regular basis. So we could do it. You could hire like a maintenance person to go around and take a look at it, someone that could take orders from the lead person in HVAC and the supervisor. So, I think that this is, but once again, if we don't follow the board policy, there's kitchenettes in a lot of the classrooms. So, and Victoria, I'm not trying to throw your people under the bus, but there's also these exist in the maintenance shops and everywhere else. So if we don't follow these protocols, the cost savings, it's just ridiculous. So,
and I think, Matt, to your point, we certainly want to look at what we can do internally. And, as I said, it doesn't seem that we're going to be moving forward with synergistics, which is fine. It's just a question of how do we then calculate what that savings will be, right? It kind of becomes very unknown. And I think, Joyce, maybe to what you're saying is, do we have people internally that can do this now? Seeing that I have not seen FUSD operate in person at full scale since my arrival because of the pandemic, it's hard for me to know, but I would venture a very solid guess that we don't have people already employed that have enough time within the scope of their position to take on that comprehensive role. So the question then would be, what kind of position do we need to either recreate what kind of position do we need to modify or establish so that we have that scope of work, and then where would that position fit within the district to make sure that they have the right scope of authority or working with the right supervisor to.
Yeah, and I get that, CJ, but it sounds, just with Matt talking to you, you've got a whole department of people that probably know a lot more. I know that you just got here, but I've been here for 20 years, and those guys know everything about everything, every nook and cranny. And so if you're looking, you might have those professionals that already exist, and it might just mean collectively meeting with a group of SEIU maintenance people and say, what do we got that we can move forward quickly and eat, the easy stuff, that low hanging fruit that you can already start implementing regardless of budget cuts or not. I mean, what he said about those swimming pools was like, what? Whoa,
Right. Well, to your point, Joyce, I reached out to my director and asked him about it, and it didn't sound like anybody talked to him. It didn't sound to our supervisor of electricians is very knowledgeable and actually oversaw the changing of lights to, we started at T12, now we're down to T4, and we're doing LED light. We're doing a lot of this in-house. And also the seers of HVAC equipment. I mean, we have a lot of able-bodied people inside. And so almost everything I saw on there, on the list from the PowerPoint was overtly redundant. And I'm surprised, like I said, that our supervisors weren't contacted. So just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I see some other hands. Rais and then Victoria.
I just want to clarify that the position that Matt is talking about, we still have that position in the district. In previous budget balancing solutions, Board of Education decided to freeze that position, not eliminate. So the position is still there, is frozen or defunded, but we do have that position, and that's in FSMA. It's a management position.
Right. Thank you, Rice. Yes.
Let's see, that was Victoria.
Yeah, if Trustee Campbell, though, was going to continue on with this strand, I'd like her to go first. I was actually going to switch gears a little bit.
I just had a quick question. Just listening to the conversation, knowing that, this $600,000 is a part of this tier 1. So if we take this off, we got to put something in its place, correct?
Well, if we take off 600,000, then we would need to either put something in its place, or like other things that we may take off the list, we would have to make sure that when we got to the end of the list, we still had 17.6 million to submit. Right now, the list, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Right now, the list totals just over 20 million. So there is a little bit of wiggle room, but if we take it, enough things off the list, we still need to make sure that at the end of the day, we are submitting a total of 17.6.
Right. But we still have quite a few of those items on that 20 million that need to be negotiated, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And then the second part of that is it possible to say that it is the goal of the district to reduce our energy efficiency by 20% and put a number to it based on what we're currently paying? It doesn't have to be 20%. I'm just throwing out 20% as a boilerplate number. We could say 10, we could say 5, we could say some percentage based on the energy expenses that we know we currently have, and make that a goal to help us in the energy reduction piece.
I would say we certainly could do it. I don't know what the county's response would be to that. I think it kind of goes in line with some of the things that might be looked at in the same context of if it's the shift in health benefits, right? If that's good for all of our employees and it ends up being a negotiated outcome, then a consequence of that, a positive consequence, might be some savings. And whether or not we make the energy reduction specifically a part of this cycle of budget reductions, it's going to be a good business practice for us to figure out how do we reach those savings anyway. The county, it's a little bit subjective in that nature, even though they've given us the 17.6, they could look at our efforts in total and say, you're really on the right track to getting your budget on where it needs to go. And because you've identified so many specific elements of the 17.6, they might be okay with that portion of it being referenced as an energy reduction. The other alternative, because we haven't asked them that specific question, is that they may say to us, we need more details about exactly how you're going to reach that. And it may be just be, I don't want to say that $600,000 is a little bit amount of money. It's not, it's significant.
Right.
But if we were submitting something to the county that said, this is $4 million of our total reduction, they'd probably give us a full stop there.
Right.
But because it's 600,000, they may be willing to give us their, some leeway there that says, okay, we recognize a good faith effort in that, and tell us a little bit more about how you plan to do it. So we could talk to the county about how they might respond to that.
Right.
I-
And then
I
maybe
do wanna-
Matt, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I would offer one thing to that, though. I know the board is currently considering solar, and we've been delaying that as a board item. If that item is approved, that would be able to substantiate the savings that we are projecting, and probably more than that. I'm pretty sure if we move forward with that solar program that Kelly's planning to bring, that will yield far in excess. I'm pretty sure it will be more than 600,000. I'm pretty close to it.
In the first year?
As soon as we get those arrays up, if we can get them up between now and August, I would, yeah.
So Matt, historically, since we're talking about a historical perspective here, with this energy person who was doing the energy policing and turning off lights and stuff, is that person still in the district or no?
They froze the position during the 2010, well, it started with the budget reduction of 2010, but yeah, he retired. So Rais is right. The position still exists on paper. There's just nobody doing it right now.
Nobody doing it, right. So I'm wondering then, Superintendent, if we were to say that as part of this 20% energy reduction plan we would be bringing someone in to, because we were going to bring these people in, Synergenics, and we were going to pay them out of what was perceived savings, that we could possibly do that part-time, doesn't have to be a full-time person, a part-time person, in addition to the solar thing that would help us, because the solar thing is not even in here, that could help us bring down some costs for the district.
I think we could certainly consider that. My only reservation would be that I think with a district the size and scope with our range of facilities, it might be more than a part-time position. So we just have to discuss, how much we designate and commit to that, and what the expense is related to our projected savings.
Okay, and maybe have a conversation, like Matt said, with the supervisors, which did we not have a conversation with the supervisors?
I didn't have a conversation specifically about synergistics with them, no.
Oh, okay. No, I'm talking about then specifically about energy saving strategies and what that might look like, whether we could yield a 5%, 10% savings over the next year, or what that might look like. I would be curious to see how we might be able to mitigate the impact of this $600,000. I'm done. I was just talking energy.
I have a question. I cannot find the raise hand tool anywhere, so sorry, I'm interrupting. I'm like a first grader. But my question is, if we have a custodial staff that's on site in the evening, why can't it just be part of their check as they're going through a room? Like at my school site, the custodian will come and cleans my room. If I were in school and this is a typical year, he comes in and cleans the room typically after I'm gone. So why couldn't he just make sure the lights were off? Why wouldn't that just be something that would be done, or that the thermostat's off? Why would we need to hire someone? I'm questioning to do that.
I mean, I could, for historical perspective, once again, it was always an FMSA position because it's not always as simple as turning off the lights. It needs to be somebody that has, some level of purview over the facilities and the people. So like a custodian can't troubleshoot as to why a unit doesn't turn off at night.
Oh, I thought you were just talking about turning off like the thermostats and stuff. I'm like that.
Oh, no, I mean, but it's sometimes
they should be able to do that.
Well, they should be able, yeah, they should be able to. But yeah, I mean, that's not always the case, but I mean, there's always more to the position.
Okay.
And once again, it's somebody that would, on top of looking at their route. So the custodians are going to be bombarded when the kids come back, first off. And then secondly, it needs to be someone that's very familiar with energy cost and, what the total watts are for the school. And then to be able to check in with other levels of tradespeople as it pertains to figure out what they could do. So it's more than a custodian. So.
Okay, thank you.
And Sheila, if you go to your react emoji down at the bottom there, you'll see the raise hand feature.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So I think it was Trustee Jones and then Victoria, or did I get that order wrong?
Well, I just wanted to comment on this really quick. I think we've gotten bogged down for a very long time in an item that only amounts to 600,000, when it seemed very clear to me at the board meeting that the board wasn't inclined to pursue this right away. So even if we know we need to reduce energy costs, but in terms of counting this toward our 17.6 million, I don't think we can commit to doing that. So I think we know we need to do this, but for me, it's off the table in terms of adding it to the 17.6 million total. And I'm concerned that we only have 17 minutes left of this meeting. And I'm hoping we can move on to something else, because this 600,000 isn't going to really get us very far anyway.
Okay, and I think Victoria was ready to change gears. So Victoria?
Yes, and though, while I think my question is, or query is a little bit bigger philosophically, it is prompted by a smaller dollar amount. So I want to be, aware of what Trustee Jones is noting. But since the purpose of our task force is to advise the superintendent, I'm wondering if our task force would like to engage in a conversation about and now switching gears on what tiers are, forgetting tiers on budget cuts. In teaching, we talk about the tiers of support that we do for students, and tier 1 being the largest, being the most important. We have that kind of reinforced to us repeatedly, and that is the solid education that we give every single child. And then from there are tiered interventions or enrichments that we might do for kids, but tier 1 we always say is the most important. So I'm wondering, because I looked into it a little bit more on the additional period for the elective that students were receiving at Hopkins, and I had thought because of LCAC and it was talked about students with their language learning, that maybe that would count as an unduplicated student count where they're still emerging in language skills. But these are specifically fully bilingual students taking a language as their elective that are also then taking orchestra or another elective. So having looked into that, and this is really a philosophical understanding, I think that it would be great for us as the budget advisory task force to have in advising the superintendent who works with the school board. Do we fundamentally believe that we would be cutting back on tier 1 services in order to add additional things out of our general fund dollars? When students, for example, as was brought up at the meeting, there are students in special education who have their only elective utilized for a resource period, and they actually get 0 electives during the day because their elective is taken up by resource. And instead, in this case, we're dedicating funds for students who will get 2 electives. I want to say, for me, it has very little to do with the immersion program. It is a philosophical position. I love the immersion program. My son went through Vallejo Mill, and it was amazing. The district already subsidizes it in a way because he was fortunate enough to be in a 13 student class his 6th grade year in dual immersion. And the district commits that they will not all of a sudden say, oh no, it's too few students, we're not going to have that. So this is something beyond that we would be doing, that is not open to other schools. It's not open to other students who even need 1 elective, as with resource. So I know that on this budget, it's only this 1 item because I believe it's the only middle school junior high that has a 7th period. But I do understand that there are multiple high schools that also have 7th periods. And I would like to have a little bit more discussion district-wide, what our thoughts are on what students are getting that additional kind of time for learning, which teaching remedial math myself, I taught a 7th period at Irvington High, and all of those students were struggling to pass algebra for the first time, which is the #1 gatekeeper for why kids say they drop out, is they just can't pass algebra after years. So I don't know, and this is completely at the superintendent's discretion, because the purpose of this task force is to advise you. But I just don't know if that's something that the task force has any thoughts on when we come to approaching budget cuts. Should we be cutting our main services to students while we have students that are receiving additional schooling that are not at risk for accessing the main services in our schools?
Thanks, Victoria. I think, in terms of this task force advising me to bring information forward to the board, I'm certainly happy to have some discussion on that item. It's been something that's been discussed at board meetings as well, both by the trustees and by the community. And I just want to share that in terms of your discussion about what could be funded out of the LCAP, this would be a program that would not really qualify for those designations based on the characteristics of the students. And I hate to sometimes describe it that way, but that's the funding model that we live in under the state of California, and how some of those kind of categorical funds come down to us. So Joyce, you had your hand up. Is it regarding this?
Yes.
Okay, why don't we continue with that?
Okay, so it's more of a comment than a question. I am going to do something I don't normally do, but I felt like it was super important to do so. CSEA supports what Miss Victoria just said as it relates to the 0 period at Hopkins. I have noticed that our parents are laying blame at just one bargaining unit on some not earned. And I don't want the public watching tonight to understand that there are other employee groups here that also believe, and I'm a special ed educator, and when Victoria just said that our special ed students aren't even offered the elective, they have to go to resource as their elective. That's concerning. We have a lot of special ed students who are not even given the same opportunity as the 0 period at Hopkins. And so I want to make sure that the public and this committee knows that CSEA stands with FUTA on this philosophical issue. And I didn't want it to be Fata's message alone. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Joyce. Is there any other discussion from the task force in terms of the zero period and how it relates to the Sheila? You found the hand raise feature.
Look
Go
at
ahead,
me.
please.
I was just gonna say, this meeting isn't being recorded, I don't think, if it was supposed to be.
I don't think it's being recorded. I think it's being streamed out. Luis, are you
Oh,
on and
okay.
able to confirm that? I'm pretty sure that it is, but no, it wasn't something we were necessarily recording, but thank
Okay.
you. Trustee Jones.
Yeah, to Victoria's point, regardless of what happens with this issue, I think in terms of Hopkins, I think we need to really take a look at, people have cited that Civil Rights Act as a reason that we need to keep this, which I think we need to find out if it applies. I have questions about how that is being read, but I do think we need to take a look at, are we in violation of that act when it comes to our special ed and ESL students who are in resource? We may actually have a violation that we aren't offering them an elective. So I think we need to take a look into that more deeply.
Thank you, Trustee Jones. Any other discussion on this topic related to, either specifically to the zero period conversation or in a general context? I think as Victoria was describing earlier, the discussion of, when we get into a budget reduction, what are we looking at in terms of the general services available to all students versus additional services? Sheila?
Hold on. Sorry, I'm having distractions as well, but my question is not about the zero period, but I did see that it's in the tier 1 stuff. I don't know, where's the xylophone baby? But the question is tier 1 automatically, is that what's being presented as the first round? So that's the most important, that's the ones that we're going for first. And then if needed, put the other, because if we're gonna need to show 17.6, that's pretty much all 3 tiers, because we're gonna need to do all of it. So, I mean, we're gonna have to say that all of those are being cut, but then when it comes to narrowing it down to the 6.4, which I guess we won't know until May, is that right? Then we'll be looking at the tier 1 pretty much only, is that right? Because I did see that the furlough days is almost exactly 6.4, but that's in tier 2. So I was like, well, if we just did that, it's done. I mean, the Board of Education is just, it's really simple for you guys. It's just not simple, but I mean,
it's a good
much
question.
less discussion if we're only talking about one topic versus that entire list that's in tier 1.
It's a good question. And this is part of what the board has been discussing. And it is only conceptual in terms of how we've designed the tiers, but the idea behind them is what you've described. Kind of that whatever we put in tier 1, whatever that ends up being, those would be the things that would most likely be enacted as reductions in the end of the process. And that tiers 2 or 3 would be the things that would be least likely to be enacted when we get to the end of the equation. So I think that is a good way to conceptualize it and kind of look at it that way. And almost in the same concept is, if we have to hand in the list that says, here's how we'd get to 17.6, as you said, it might be later this spring where we say, okay, out of the list that we handed in, we're only going to go this far into the list. And ideally, that's the concept behind tier 1. And that's the discussion about what input the task force may have or the trustees may have about what should or shouldn't be on tier 1 and what should or shouldn't be on tier 2 and where should these things fall in terms of a priority order. Let's see, Selena?
Yeah, so on the Hopkins zero period topic, so from a student perspective and from what we've talked about in SURF, we definitely think that Hopkins zero period should be like prioritized first, not only because of like the immersion program, but also because of the band program, which has actually taken a long time to actually establish their recognition and their program. And a lot of students really use that zero period class to actually like go into the band program. So, and that program has actually gotten like national recognition, has drawn a lot of students like to that school. So we think that this should definitely be prioritized, because a lot of students would definitely be devastated and really sad if that program were to be cut. And we definitely agree that like special education and like resources is definitely should be prioritized as well. We just don't think Hopkins zero period should be cut at this time, and definitely should be prioritized.
Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you representing the voice of the students in SURF on that issue. Trustee, I'm sorry, I'm just making sure I've got everybody in order. Trustee Jones.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back to what Sheila said about furlough days. And I don't know if you were, I know that's a target amount that looks good, but for anybody who didn't turn into the board meeting, I just wanted, I'm on record as saying that I'm opposed to furlough days. If we can avoid those, I think that's really important, because what happens when you have furlough days is we can't reduce our instructional days. So those furlough days don't come out of instructional days. So where do they come out of? They come out of PD for our teachers. And our teachers are gonna need more PD, not less. So it's really hard for me to get on board with the idea of a furlough unless we have no other options. When we know we want to provide trauma-informed instruction PD for our teachers, we want to be looking at restorative justice. We want to be looking at some mental health PD. All of those things our teachers are going to need more of, not less. And my fear is if we furlough, those opportunities are going to be gone, which I think, especially right now, it's not the time to do that unless we really are forced to.
Yeah, I think it would have been good for a lot of our topic discussions today to be on what CJ had just mentioned of let's prioritize what should be, because that's the perfect way of saying like, oh, this is where it would be. Because sometimes like I wouldn't have paid attention to that. So now then you go, oh, okay, I see why. Maybe it's on tier 2 versus tier 1, but to also have our group have a discussion about where that priority would have been today would have been nice.
Joyce?
So I wanted to circle back to, and I hate that saying, so I'm never going to use it again, to Trustee Jones and what you said about furloughs as it relates to PDs. And I'm going to give you a little historical background on this. And when we took furloughs as classified workers, it did not come out of our PD days because we don't have PD days. So my work year is pretty much when the school starts for students and when it ends for students. There is no extra wiggle room for the 10-month employees. It came right out of our paychecks. We didn't even not work on a furlough day. We continued to work and the pay was reduced. So when you offer up what a furlough is to the public, it's not don't work and don't get paid. It's continue to work, but don't get paid. And so we're not losing PD days. CSEA wouldn't, we would lose. They took it out of our vacation pay. We get a vacation allotment once a month, and it was just taken right out of that, I believe. And so we didn't even, we continued to work 180 days and got paid less. So it's not a furlough, it's a salary reduction because the district would receive the same amount of work from their employees, but for less pay.
Thanks, Joyce. I appreciate you sharing that context. And I think, I can speak for myself, having been in a position where I was furloughed 5 days in 1 year, 4 in the next year, and 3 in the following year as an administrator in a prior district. And I think across the board, it kind of speaks to the commitment that educators in total bring to the profession. There's always days beyond that are worked, and the work never lessens. So it's always a complicated discussion. Victoria, then Sheila.
Thanks, CJ. I just didn't want the conversation to go by before I clarified a bit. FUD has not taken an anti, band or orchestra or Hopkins position. Our historical position, which was passed at our rep council before I was president, is that we believe in additional dedicated resources for students that are not accessing the schooling necessary for them to stay on grade level. So that I'm speaking specifically from that position and how that is universally applied, notwithstanding 7 period days for students. In this case at orchestra, it's just in contrary to what our current standing position is. And that's different from speaking specifically, FUDTA does have the position that we are against policing in schools, and that there's no amount of dollars that we believe should be going away from our educational staff to be spent on police officers or law enforcement. So those are just the two relevant that we have for Tier 1 currently.
Thank you, Victoria. Sheila? You're on mute, Sheila.
I really am a student today. So the other year, I could have sworn I taught 179 days. What was that for? Was that a furlough? It was like 4 or 5 years ago. Do you guys remember?
No, they never have reduced the school calendar.
Was it the year of the fire, maybe?
Yeah.
I could have sworn I taught 179.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So yes. So there. No, it might have been the storm that flooded everything.
Oh yeah, when they
And
that ended up just being a little rain. Okay.
Yeah. No, I
do
got
remember.
flooded. That's not my
We
house
didn't
was
have
flooded and-
like anything in my school.
Yeah.
It was like
So
nothing.
no,
so
my
I was
house
like,
got flooded. So
Okay.
the district applied for a waiver, so they didn't have to add that
Okay.
day back on.
got it. Because I was thinking that was a furlough, and I was like, I thought that was a furlough, but that was just a takeaway from that. Okay, thank you.
So we've got a few more minutes left, and is there any other feedback in terms of the overall reductions, the tiers that people would want to share out, or other things that you certainly can email me them separately if you have a concern that you don't want to share in the moment? I am always happy to get input outside the meeting, but I wanted to see if there were any other discussions or topics that we wanted to surface quickly before we wrapped up.
I did just want to follow up to see what sort of process could be put into place, given the number of parents who are talking about private school. And so certainly if we have a large parent base who's willing to spend $10,000 or $20,000 a year to do private school, then I'm wondering through what vehicle we would be able to take donations to fund programs that they would want to see added into our school district that wouldn't take away from the core services that our other students are entitled to. So I don't know if that's just a long-term kind of thing to look into.
Yeah, it's something we can certainly look into. The donations are always a way to consider how we can enhance some things that are happening. And the only challenge with donations, as I'm sure everybody on this call understands, is that we kind of have to receive those as one-time funds. And so when we do our 3-year budget projection, we can only count on those in 1 year of the budget, and then they have to come out of the next year. But there are districts in the Bay Area that do receive donations from their parent community to help enhance some programs, and we could certainly have some longer discussions about creating some methods for that to become a reality here if we wanted to. I muted myself. Such a talent. I appreciate everybody's time, and if there are questions or feedback that you have outside this meeting, please feel free to email me. As you saw on the slide, because we've had a lot of community input, we've had a number of board meetings. We'll be updating our board presentation even after the agenda publishes later tonight. And so that everybody who's watching this call and everybody who's on this call knows, whenever we update a presentation after the publication of the board, we call it out in the presentation. We highlight that it's updated. And just so everybody else knows, in accordance with the Brown Act, when a presentation is updated, we make sure that it's made available to the public and the trustees at the same moment. So that ensures transparency in everything that we're doing. So if you want to follow along in the next 2 days, next 2 work days before our board meeting, you can check out our board docs and our board agenda and see the updated presentation as we get closer. I appreciate everybody's time. I wish you a wonderful weekend ahead, and hopefully someone you know has got a vaccine recently. We've seen a pretty good uptick of our availability for employees within the district to get a vaccine, either through our local partnership and opportunity provided by Hellers, or through the Oakland Coliseum. So we're seeing a lot of good numbers in that sense, and hopefully it's either you or somebody you know.
CJ.
Yes.
So apparently the Oakland Coliseum is the new FUSD. I have a lot of my members are going tomorrow. I myself going tomorrow. And so CSEA is encouraging all of our members to sign up either through My Turn or through Haller or the Fremont Fire Department. And I just want to take a moment to say thank you for making those partnerships happen. I know it's something you've been working on, and so we appreciate all that work. So I wanted to ask, are we meeting again as a task force, or are we going dormant?
I would say we'll be meeting again at some point because in all my career as a superintendent in public education, there's never been a constant flow of increased funding. So we may give ourselves a break after we get through the next board meeting. But I think as we move forward, certainly something that we'll need to continue to meet about when we get into, for example, the May revise and we start looking at the projections, because we'll be in that space where we will have submitted a list for 17.6 and we'll be somewhere, at a smaller number. And so I think there will be a need for more discussion.
So does
right.
that mean that our March 15th meeting, we're not doing that one?
I have not even looked at that part of March yet, but it may, I'll send something out next. I'll try and send something out next week. I'll check in with staff. It may mean that we don't meet. Marcus, when's our second interim report?
We will present that at the March 10th board meeting.
Okay. So we'll send out a communication regarding March 15th. And I think we'll be meeting again at some point in the near future, because we'll still have a lot to talk about as we navigate this year. All right, anything else before we go? I think we're all good. All right, thank you everybody for your time. Have a safe, restful, and wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.